Okay. All right, everybody. Well, welcome back. Thanks for hanging in there for one of the later sessions. And we're going to kind of, again, change the focus a little bit on this one from, secondary use of EMR data for research, which takes up a lot of our focus, and that's good. But this is a little bit more about how do we use our informatics tools to really support clinical trials or broadly multi-center clinical studies. They don't necessarily have to be trials. Let's go to my next slide. Thank you. So let's just start understanding the landscape a little bit, right? So the majority of clinical trials in academic centers are now multi-center. At least for us, it's 65% of our true clinical trials are multi-center. The time to activation and first enrollment is longer than necessary, so costs increase, and I think that's still basically true. We could argue, what is the right time, but any of us that do these notice that it takes longer to activation than we would like. Most academic centers have to build some local IT support for each trial, whether it's the IRB, study calendar, whatever may have to be done within the EMR, research billing, any of those. So there's always some local build. And right now, there's very little increased efficiency in building these components from the first to the last site. It seems like for little sharing, we all are, working through that issue almost by ourselves to get started. Next one. So I'm just saying, here are some recent examples where that I've dealt with lately that I think kind of highlights some of the issues that we're talking about, right? So I'm part of a CTSA consortium on measuring research participant satisfaction. And we're doing this, if you take, at least at Hopkins, a random sample of everybody that's in a trial, we send them a research participant satisfaction survey. The data is now being uploaded to Vanderbilt for a benchmarking exercise. And these are all big sites, and we all wanted to represent the study protocol. So we could begin to look and say, are people in this type of protocol more satisfied than others? The reality is all of our institutions had a very hard time with a common description of the study protocol. And in fact, we're pretty much starting from zero on that because we didn't have it in either our local CTMSs or whatever. Study calendar and protocol representation, we know those continue to be very important and not as standard as they could be. Single IRB implementation, this may go, it would be really nice if there was at least a more computable IRB national application, where we've really stumbled, I think, in the single IRB to make it more efficient because we never really defined what the IRB should cover and what's the difference between the local IRBs and the main IRB. ClinicalTrials.gov reporting is obviously another issue where it's been hard to get standards there that we have been working with on how you define a clinical trial. And the reality is, from the researcher's perspective, and we were talking about this, is an outsider looked at it and said, so the research team puts the application into the NIH or somewhere in one format, and then it's in another format to become a protocol, then it's in a third format to go to the publisher, and then it's in a fourth format to go to clinicaltrials.gov. And that really doesn't seem like the most efficient way for us to move the field forward. Kim, next slide. And so who might benefit from use of these standards or more interoperability, right? So the clinical research teams who are increasingly frustrated by the complexity of what's needed, that they need to do to what appears to them a simple idea. I want to just get this protocol done at my site, and more components get layered on that do not seem easy to them. Institutional clinical research offices are having to do a lot of work to activate each protocol, and have their own frustrations trying to do more with less resources. Researchers, policymakers wanting to do any secondary data analysis that they can combine, data across protocols, or look at broad research trends, something like that. They would definitely like to see better standards and potentially interoperability. And then finally, the patients and the health of the public, right? That's what we have to keep focused. I didn't give my warning so much at the beginning of this, but the reality is the health of America is not so great right now. And we're seeing reductions in life expectancy that are really incredibly rare. I don't think we understand how bad the last few years have been. And all of us in this field, have an obligation to see what we can do to change that direction, or the public and Congress are going to start holding us accountable for these outcomes. And I think we want to make sure that we were part of the solution. So that's my start to this session. And I hope that when we do this, we're going to have some, really some two speakers to frame it. And then hopefully at the end, we cannot do all of this. You're going to help us maybe prioritize which are the areas that we think if we focused on right now, we could make a big impact. And so our two speakers today are Les Leonard, who has been in part of these meetings for some time. He's the Vice President and Chief Medical Officer and the head of the Biomedical Informatics Group at MUSC, and has really done a great job taking that organization to a good place in terms of use of information. And then James Werdeman from Advera or Encore, who has been with that organization for some time and is now the Chief Product Officer, and has taken the lead to try to think about standards and interoperability. And so we think both of them will give us a good perspective on this issue, and then we can open it up for comments from all of you. So Les, why don't you start?
Thanks, Dan. Did my screen sharing thing work? Okay. Oh, exactly.
Maybe yeah.
Got it. And let's go. All right. So can everyone see my PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, well, yes, we can. You just got it. There you go.
Perfect. So again, really honored to be speaking here to you all about this important area. I'm probably not the best person to be talking about standards. I think all the old jokes about standards apply, that standards are wonderful. That's why there's so many of them. And that, the old joke also about, one standard to embrace them all, and that just creates another standard. So in kind of looking at this, we want to keep our eyes on the goal. And really, I look at the goal as, this idea that we are integrating information across the research enterprise from, our EHRs, the CTMS systems, the EIRB. Though, Dan wanted me to say that we are an Encore shop as well as an Epic shop. And so a lot of my examples will come from Encore and Epic as we're talking that. It is not an explicit endorsement of these products, that's our experience. So let me go back to this. So you can kind of look here that we have these systems systems that all need to speak with each other, from e-consent to patient-generated health data systems to research, the RDMS research data management systems as being distinct from the EHR, the CTMS, EIRBs, those types of things. That all of these need to work together in concert to really be effective. And the question is, whether it's standards or APIs that make a difference. And sometimes people have argued that, APIs can be a replacement for standards. It's really my view, and the view I'll advocate for in this talk, is that it's the combination of standards and APIs that really gets us to the goal area that we are looking to achieve. And that without the standards, we wouldn't be able to really apply the APIs as we need to. It would be too difficult. And then, but without the APIs, the standards would really not be meaningful. So that that's really what allows us to be able to put pieces of systems together in innovative and interesting ways to solve problems. So first of all, I'd really like to talk about how standards accelerate data management for research. And here, what we're really talking about is the electronic health record as a source of data and other primary source systems, and then research data systems, where the research data are captured, integrated, processed, and put together. Now, the reason we care about this so much is that electronic health records are really evolving as a source of data. And this is a picture of the domains of the US CDI Draft 2 with the new domains highlighted in yellow as to what each electronic health record is going to need to be able to produce and exchange by 223 for each patient in the record on demand. And that you can kind of see the differences from allergies to plans of treatment, to care team members, to encounters, to diagnostic information, to our problems and demographics, and unique identifiers for devices, and detailed vital sign measurements, and provenance of laboratories, and of the other types of measurements that are in there that I think will solve a lot of problems. So US CDI is kind of a conceptual model of where things are going, and that most of you are aware of this. Right now, US CDI is focused on CCD 2.1 standards, so XML-based descriptions of healthcare data, but it is being extended with FHIR resources, and that probably by the time that it's widely available, that US CDI will be available in FHIR from electronic healthcare record systems. There are a few other things to make it broadly available across the country that are barriers to FHIR, and we don't have time to get into those, but that I think it's likely to be an interface for most electronic healthcare record systems. Now, we look at FHIR as the canonical model of healthcare data, and that most healthcare data is in very detailed clinical models in electronic healthcare records. And these models are terribly institution specific and context dependent as to what they are. So that, and while there's been a lot of work about, normalizing clinical data models for computational purposes, this detailed approach has a lot of barriers and is extremely difficult to implement. What has been more successful, and it's apropos, we're speaking here on the close to the 10th anniversary of the beginning of the FHIR movement. Hard to believe that, but FHIR resources tend to be a wonderful object-oriented model that combine the details of the individual and of the laboratory measurement or the observation or other things, and the person in an object-oriented fashion, so that there's an automated inheritance of different properties and features that make FHIR resources uniquely well suited to modeling individual level patients. So our belief about this is really that the FHIR repository or the FHIR data store is an important intermediate data store that can take the data from a clinical research or a clinical setting from a variety of different routes, whether it's directly in FHIR, whether it comes from ADT transactions, flat files, CCD files, and then normalizes that all into FHIR resources. Now, what we've been able to do with FHIR resources then to prove that this is really a canonical model for healthcare data is to work on systematic transforms to other data models. And we use a subscription-based process for that, where FHIR repositories have this subscription feature that allows you to copy data on demand when you update a field. And so we essentially, for the OMOP, BCORNet, ACT models, have developed tools that allow you to, in real time, whenever there's an update to a FHIR repository, copy things over to the corresponding OMOP, BCORNet, or ACT data module, and that this, essentially allows us to replicate and maintain parallel clinical data repositories for an area. And that this gets around this use of standards here, and the subscription part of the FHIR standard really gets around one of the problems Dan was talking about, is the need to maintain data in multiple different models for different projects. And that there's a broad variety of work. I was looking for Emily Paff to see if she was on here, about transforming FHIR to a number of different models. There's some published work with Campfire with that, and other places. There's actually work on HL7 to CDISC transforms that have been published. And that there's a lot of work at both CDC and FDA on this sort of canonical representation as well. I really like FHIR in this setting because it's also a way of using subscriptions to enrich data. As we know, the addresses of people change over time, whether they're alive or dead, or the social determinants in the geography that they live in, air pollution levels, other things. All of those things can be part of subscriptions that are enriched from outside resources and brought into the FHIR repository as a research module. So I think that this idea of bringing things together in FHIR is really one of the more useful approaches to standards, in particular adding this. Now, we've published a paper on this related to our work on COVID-19 research in JAMIA this year, and that if you want to know more about that, you can look at our paper there to give you the details on this approach to using data transformation. We've also worked with something called bulk FHIR. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but different research resources like REDCap can and do have lists of patients that are part of studies, and that we don't really want to do the updates on these patients one at a time. So there is an extension to the FHIR standard called bulk FHIR, which is designed to allow you to submit a list of patients at a time to registries or to other sources of data, and to get the data back. Now, we've proposed using this and have developed prototypes and are using this for hospitals to work with state immunization registries, but it could be any research registry that you're working with, where you have a patient list and you submit that to the cancer registry or to the immunization registry, and that every day you're going to want to get from that registry the updated results of that entire patient list. Now, you can do this one transaction at a time, or with bulk FHIR, you can do it 10,000 transactions at a time. And that it's obviously more efficient to do this with 10,000 transactions at a time. So we've been exploring this with the with ERA, the American Immunization Registry Association, and have a pilot of bulk fire queries up. We've also built a REDCap instance, which allows our students to access our state immunization registry and combine that with other types of data. And we're testing those types of things. And again, I described some of these ideas in this paper that also came out this year on how bulk fire can enhance immunization registry reporting. But really, for all research registries, that this is probably a much more efficient way to get data out of a clinical data repository for a specific set of patients. And it's definitely something you should be tracking. Now I'm going to move on to acceleration of trial startups, and that in this world, what we're talking about is trying to go between our catalog Spark request system, Encore, COAS, which is our grant management system, and our electronic health record system, and that we want to use the interoperability between these systems to be able to enhance and accelerate research. And here we're going to really come up against the problems where standards are just not available yet, or they're too difficult to use, or they're not sufficiently refined. So some of you are Spark Request users. Spark Request is our open source platform. I think about 14 sites, about 10 CTSAs use this. It's a shopping cart paradigm where when you want to organize a clinical trial, you go to various services our CTSA offers, and you select the services, and that you add them to the shopping cart. And that these services might be things like going to the hospital and ordering an X-ray or a laboratory draw, or a ECG service, or an MRI, from those types of things. Or they might be more advanced services like our teleconsent service, so that you could actually order a DoxyMe teleconsent addition to your clinical trial and put it into there as part of the Spark request. Now, that takes some work to deliver on all that, but as you're pricing a trial and developing the background for the trial, that as to what your approach will be, this allows someone to rapidly put these things together. We've also created something called a Research Master ID to span the different systems we have here, like our clinical trial management system, our electronic health record, our IRB, our sponsored projects and financial data, and other legacy data, is that we try to assign a single ID to every project so that we can then look at the impact and the time to start up across various parts of our system. We do get a fair amount of duplicates, and the biggest problem with this approach is the need to manually deduplicate the research master IDs given the production system. But the system actually works reasonably well at our institution, particularly because most of the services are bought from a single source, and you can't use the IRB system without having one of these, and you can't really use our Encore system and other things without a research master ID. And if you want to read more about our research integrated network of systems, a virtual data warehouse, and the research master ID, you can look at this paper that also came out this year in JAMIA to learn more about the research master ID and what we've implemented in it. So this is a map of what our systems really look like, and the APIs that go between them. I'm going to call attention to a couple of things. The eIRB system. So we run a click IRB that's heavily optimized. I think generation 6 of the click system. We've never really migrated up from there. And then this has APIs that go and generate the research master ID and keep these two things in sync. We have an Encore system, and we have our Spark request system, which I showed you already. So that our goal is then to be able to synchronize these in a, our sort of play at best of breed. And that all of these then work inside of Epic with our EHR. So we have a couple of APIs that go at hand. The Epic and Encore have an API to make sure the demographics synchronize between Encore and Epic. We have an API that we're building that will get the IRB information and regulatory information into Encore. Spark Request has a couple of APIs. It does have an API to get the research master identifier. And then the interaction between Encore and Spark Request is a little bit complicated because of Spark Request is our legacy system. In the setting where somebody's pricing out a trial and developing the trial initially, we see most of our work going on in Spark Request. And then we need to send a message to Encore about creating an initial study and footprint and a record of a study that's in the process of development. And that Encore has what's called a minimal footprint API. And this is an area that we think might be ripe for standards. In our world, we also have this relationship between Encore, which is used to author the complex study calendars and bring the richness of the application as far as what can be described in there. That we take those study calendars and through the Encore Spark API standard, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a second, we send the calendar to Spark Request, and then we edit it further, update the pricing, make sure we've actually chosen the right service, because the Spark Request catalogs are kept in tighter synchronization than we can keep with the Encore ones in our environment. May just be a fault of our environment, but this is where we have the most up-to-date data. And then, so then we edit the standard trial description that is sent to us in Spark Request and send that back into Epic, where the billing calendar is created for the study. So this is, and then here the Epic also has outputs as to who the users are that are associated with the trial, and has the people who are authorized to access the trial, and that we check on that and get reports on that out of our Spark Request system, which is kind of our Swiss Army knife again for most of the standards. Now, really the key standard that we see in the middle of all this is something that is an older standard called the HL7 V3 it's IHE, or Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise Standard, for clinical research process content. Now, it's actually a combination of those standards, so of that and one other standard for submitting and retrieving these standards. But let's just focus on the clinical research process content standard for a moment. It is really how you describe the events that can be billed for in a clinical trial. It's probably not detailed enough for most people who want to just represent the trial for scientific purposes and for operations at any site, what has to happen on a given day. And it's probably a little bit too detailed for Epic, which just wants to know what the heck to bill for. And that, so it's a good standard. Nobody's quite happy with it. It kind of represents the middle ground there, but it's something that we really want to think about how we can improve. Being an HL7 V3 standard in XML, it is really ripe for reworking as a FHIR standard to be broken down into more reusable components in more of an object-oriented way. And I'll show you you'll understand the limitations of this in a minute as we get to it. But really, this is a critical component, and that you can use this standard, and we've used it to be able to coordinate refinement of study calendars and their operations across two systems, and then bringing that into Epic inside our environment. So we'd really agree the standard works. It's just kind of awkward. And I just brought it up here to show you what the what the description of a trial looks like, and you'll see why I think it's awkward. So this is one giant XML expression that has to have closures at the front and at the back of it. For those of you who program in XML or used to program in HTML or other things, or GML, but I just call attention. I think you can understand the problems just by saying, how big is this document? Well, one description of a trial in XML with all this additional markup and structuring and other things like that is 9,400 lines. That's huge. Very difficult to debug. It's impossible to visualize for a human being, and really requires some pretty sophisticated tools to be able to edit it accurately and to ensure that there's not a problem as you're going through this kind of structured document to be able to do this. So I think, this standard, though, is useful as it is. My hat is off to Epic for being able to read a document as complex as this and turn it into something useful. Nancy, notice that I am tipping my hat to you, and I hope you appreciate it for all the work that Epic has done and other vendors have done to take this standard and to actually turn this into computable code on the backside of a program through an API. I can't imagine, I'm not aware of a lot of other APIs that pull in 9,500 lines of code and execute on them. So kudos. This is what the minimal data transfer does here, is that here what we're doing is borrowing fields in the data model that Encore has. Yes, we'd like you to allow us to, much like Epic does, have data fields that we define the meanings of as we move forward in standards and use in our own ways. Hint to James, who is following me, as to how we can make standards and still allow them to be flexible enough. Otherwise, we're going to be writing into things that have the wrong names. We'll confuse everyone, and there will be no standards because we're not actually using your data model in a standardized way. But give us enough flexibility so that we don't need to do that. Okay, so I think that kind of gets through things. Just to kind of go at this whole process itself in our institution really does accelerate things. Spark Request gives us a pretty rough estimate of a trial initially, gets us a footprint in Encore so we know which ones are coming and what needs to be tracked. Encore then allows us to get better at defining that and move it through. We polish it up again in Spark Request, and we push it into Epic for activation and to making sure that the right study personnel and other things are on the study for this whole process. Still a fair amount of work going on this. Would be great to be able to import these study calendars from national resources and other places to accelerate the development of trials and such, and to share those. And but again, it would require a lot of standardization of the data model inside of Encore. I'll probably hear this all exists, so that's okay. I'm looking forward to hearing, to having James straighten me out.
Great. Thanks a lot, Les. That's perfect. Oh, you got to finish up here?
I got more.
Okay.
Give me a little bit. This is a long day. I've got to talk. You don't want that. You've only got two of us. So I want to talk about the acceleration of patient recruitment, which kind of goes between EIRB, e-consent, and EHR. Here we're going to be talking about brand new work that we're doing with our 100,000 patient deep sequencing program called In Our DNA SC, where we are just now rolling out our pilot implementation of this program. And it really focuses on the automation of this process, focuses on being able to integrate Epic, our e-consent, and the EIRB system in a meaningful way. So let me show you how that works. And I'll cut it off here in just a minute or two. We start with Epic's Healthy Planet Registry as identifying the patient population of interest. And that's based on e-phenotype descriptions, and we heard some of the limitations of those. But this allows us to create a registry of patients that we're interested in targeting inside of Epic. this goes to our MyChart program, and that the MyChart sends a message to patients, which if they click on, will allow us to use a standard Smart on Fire to go through our custom gateway and then seamlessly take patients into our consent website without having to require them to log in again. Their login to MyChart through Smart on Fire's magic as a standard allows the patient context to be delivered to our consent website. Then the consent website goes to the EIRB and makes sure we have the right consent version stored in REDCap and is always presented on that. And then we capture the signatures, and that we store the signatures and the metadata in our REDCap database. And that the storage of this is really an area where FHIR standards could be applied. There's some recent work out of Vanderbilt that shows that they need to be enhanced slightly to be able to represent research consents, which are slightly different than consents for procedures and other things like that. But the idea here is that, and we definitely need standards that allow EIRB systems to move consent versions into electronic consenting systems. Once you sign the consent, though, we move things back through enrollment, goes to our gateway again, and then we have a interconnect which triggers the enrollment of the patient in a research study through our creating an RSH record for them, and then also sends a lab order to the person through to Beaker so that we're able to collect the specimen for that. So with this kind of approach to standards, we've been able to largely automate the process of enrolling people. We start sending messages in Healthy Planet 2 weeks before an appointment, send a couple of reminder messages, and then hopefully get people before they show up to the hospital for their clinical visit to consent. And then if not, we can get them in the hospital with a similar workflow, and then that automatically deploys this. So we've just been using this for about a month now. We've got about a couple hundred people through this. System's working pretty smoothly for what we need to do. There's still some gaps in this and some biases in this type of a consent approach. I guess I'll go to the meeting afterwards where we're talking about e-enrollment in the unmeeting part.
Great.
Future, okay, you want me to stop here, so future work.
I think that's great, Les. You gave us really some good ideas and
okay, I'm done then.
All right.
Everybody else, so thank you.
So James, can you reflect on how Encore sees these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, first, thanks for the invite. Thanks for inviting me to come talk about this. Certainly a topic near and dear to our hearts here at Atvara. I originally didn't have slides, but I felt left out. So I actually did throw together a couple of slides. So hopefully this works on the fly. You guys can see this okay? Yeah. Okay, great. I know it's not in slideshow mode. That's okay. I'm just going to go through it real quick. I'll try to limit it to 10 minutes, make sure we have time at the end for any additional conversation. So just real quick, just in case the Atvara name is new to people, just because it's a combination of multiple companies coming together to really make an impact on the broader clinical research industry. So we're one of the largest central IRBs in the United States. So it's a roll-up of Schulman and Chesapeake and Quorum IRBs and others in that review segment. From the consulting side, now one of the largest consulting companies in this space, focusing on quality, regulatory, institutional consulting. So thousands of consultants in our network there. And then from a technology point of view, probably where you're most familiar with us. So the old Forte Research Systems where I came from. So the Encore suite of products. Also in our technology space, recently we've also added the Clinical Conductor product family. And why that was important to us is Encore, we really focus on academic medical centers, cancer centers, large health systems, where Clinical Conductor is other types of research sites, site networks, dedicated research sites. And one of the things I was going to talk about is a lot of those sites actually don't have EHRs. So kind of a different approach to what Les was talking about there from more of the engineering, heavy aspect. I don't come from an engineering background, it's more from a business process point of view. So I have a couple of examples that kind of focus on kind of thinking about the totality of research sites in the US versus those that are just EHR enabled. Also in our technology umbrella, Longboat, which is a protocol training platform, gives us some interesting perspective on what's going on a little bit broader in the industry. And these products, it's really important for us, again, how you kind of know Advara from the Encore point of view, is thinking about that entire clinical research lifecycle of making sure that you have one standardized approach towards managing research across an organization. And something we've really focused on is that interoperability of other systems. So that bottom row, critical operational systems, integrations with IRB systems, EHR systems, financial systems, very core to who we are and how we think about that. And just as a picture of some of those common ones, even as Les was describing, the calendar integration with the CRPC interface with Epic and Cerner, the RPE messages for protocol information and subject information. These were and are a great start and continue to be evolved, and we're always looking to add more. And Epic's been a fantastic partner in that space, and that's actually one example. I'll talk about third, is one of the more recent interfaces that we're adding that isn't on this list. But what I did want to talk about is just the broader clinical research vision as we think about it at Advara. We've picked out three specific areas I want to talk about, referenced there at the bottom: site selection, document exchange, and study conduct, focused on adverse events. So, Dan, when you were talking about this panel, I was thinking about multi-site trials. And one of the probably largest problems in any trial is finding the right site to work with. So kind of asking, when you are developing these multi-site trials, how do you know that that site is going to enroll and how quickly they're going to activate this study? And so we at Advara spend a lot of time thinking about site selection. We recently launched a new initiative called Site IQ, which is about helping identify the right sites for the right study. And we look at past enrollment data. We look at quality data, so like deviations and so forth. And yeah, speed to enrollment. So to me, this is one of the topics I wanted to talk about, is what makes a good site, to be the right site for your study. And I think that's an area where standards could certainly play a role. But it's still pretty undefined, right? It's not about data exchange standards at this point. It's talking about what are it's the least number of most discriminating characteristics of a site, right? You don't want to look at 100 data points to figure out if they're the right site. It's going to take too long. So how do you figure out what is the smallest number of things you can look at that's going to get rid of the most number of sites from your list? And I think that's an important area to focus, because you spend a lot of time and money activating sites that just don't enroll. And so that's one of the big inefficiencies. And kind of the question there, though, it actually ties back to maybe, Dan, what you talked about at the beginning, is in order to know if somebody was good at a similar study, is you need to be able to compare protocol to protocol. So it probably starts with standards around the protocol itself, right? How can you tell if protocol A was similar to protocol B? And then once you have that foundation, you can do a lot of this building on top of that, right? The site selection characteristics, or the participant satisfaction that you were talking about, right? So a similar data set that would actually help drive multiple initiatives there. So I would definitely put a vote in protocol standardization, because that would also drive, as mentioned, the IRB application as well. So thinking about standards around the protocol definition itself. The second one to talk about quickly is, now that a site has been selected, it takes a while to get them activated. And one of the biggest challenges we see in the industry, because we do work with sponsors and CROs and sites of all types, is the document exchange. Now, there are standards around what should exist in an investigator site file of all of the different types of documents that you have to have on file during the study, but it doesn't really get to what documents you need when. Right? So what are your green light documents? What are the first set of documents you need at site selection? Or what are the documents you need at study activation? What are the documents you need at studies closeout? In organizing those documents, so you can set expectations ahead of time that says, everybody has agreed, these are the types of documents that a PI needs or a site needs to be able to participate on a study. And then having standards built on top of that to be able to exchange those documents electronically. almost everybody stores regulatory documents electronically now. And so that is an area that is also, I think, really, really well positioned to start talking about that. There are other initiatives out there that do kind of work on document exchange, but what at least we see is they're being a little bit more proprietary, closed walls around who can exchange documents with who. And so I think that's important for standards, is they just need to be open, that you need to have the right people at the table to work on that. And one slide, just a quick plug on that, is we recently launched a new consortium with many research sites. Some of you might be surprised your name is on the list of research sites, but we're working with your research staff on the site side. Brought some sponsors and CROs to the table, which is really great. We can do that as part of Envara, is to bring all of our clients together to talk about a problem, and brought in really important supporting organizations with CDISC and Huron to talk about this problem of just the conversation around regulatory documents and who needs them and when do they need them and how can we make this a lot more efficient. So this is something that we recently kicked off and are just in the beginning stage of that. So I think document exchange is an extremely important area to talk about. And then lastly, the study conduct area. The exchange of data across institutions is extremely challenging. You know, the FHIR standards certainly help, and to be able to think about the exchange of clinical data, but that data is so sensitive that it's really slow to change, right? To be able to go from EHR, and not everything you need in a sponsor EDC is going to be represented in the EHR. Some of the data just doesn't belong there. And this is where there's going to be just some really interesting trust issues that kind of has to be a part of defining standards. It's how do you trust the data and that's being imported into the coordinating center's EDC or the sponsor's EDC, that you have to trust all of those interfaces along the way, that they've all been verified, validated, and everything along the way. So that's really challenging. But one area we've had success working with Epic on this is adverse events. So the FHIR standard for adverse events was not well defined, wasn't really up there in the maturity model very well. So we came together with Epic and said, you know, as they're launching new adverse event functionality, to be able to tie into that. And so now we have an interface that's live that some of our customers be able to take as adverse events are entered into Epic. They can be pulled over to Encore as serious adverse events. And then from there, we can even route them further, for example, to the IRB through our IRB interface. And so this is one where together, two vendors working together, maturing the standard. And I believe we're co-presenting with Epic in January at the, what is it called? The HL7 Connectathon, I believe, on that particular topic. So that was one that we spent some time on recently as well. So really quick, try to keep it to 10 minutes or less. So those are, I think, those three really important areas. Site selection, but that really needs protocol standardization to work well. The document exchange, that's probably easier. You know, just have to agree on types of documents you need when. And then, yeah, study conduct, that just continuing to mature standards and contributing back to the standards. So I'll stop there.
Well, thanks, James. And, you know, let me just push it a little bit, is to say that, you know, we have done a lot on this. I do think that, you know, there's a lot more data stored, available, ready. We have higher expectations about the study team communicating with clinicians and data going in the EMR. But I also think we have to be realistic. I don't think anybody thinks it's easier to do these studies. I don't think they're faster. They're more expensive. Research coordinators, you know, are not having a great experience doing these. They have multiple systems. And I'll just give you an example that, you know, a recent, you know, webinar, there were about 100 research people there. And I said, the question was, who's done remote consenting so far in the last year? And who thinks it's easier than when they were doing in-person consenting? I mean, it was like 80% say harder or much harder. It isn't easy to do remote consenting because of the various formats you're having to deal. You know, there's no doubt that the ability for a clinician and the clinical team to see research information and for research teams to know what's going on clinically, that is much better than it was 10 or 20 years ago. But I just don't think we are really thinking enough about the user interface for the teams, or the fact that you have multiple sponsors, multiple IRBs trying to do this. We're not making their life easier. And we're really not making clinical trials cheaper, where there's no evidence of that. So I would push us that we got to do better. And the question is, how do we do better?
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with you. One of the biggest challenges is, certainly for a study team, is think about how many electronic systems they need to log into to complete their activities on a study. And it just gets exponentially worse with every industry study you have to work on. Everybody's bringing more and more technology to a study. Something that's very important to us, why being a part of Advara is actually helps us further to get closer to the goal, which is because now we have some doors with sponsors and CROs as well to be able to talk about the problem. It is shocking how many times we talk to a sponsor or CRO that they don't actually understand the maturity of a site and the technology that sites have, that they just don't get it. And once you kind of open their eyes to it, to be able to say, let sites bring their own technology, right? I'm calling it the BYOT to a study, because you need to be able to trust the data and be able to build more and more interoperability between those systems. So study teams, the ones that should be spending time with patients, are not spending their time trying to figure out how to log into one more system and figure out how to navigate this fancy e-consent tool that was brought to them, right? Let sites invest in their own technology that works across their entire portfolio, and then just get the important data points to the sponsors. And I think it's changing. I mean, I do think people are willing to now open up and talk about that, but that's just that trust factor of and awareness, I think, is probably one of the biggest problems out there. Is people aren't aware of the technology that exists.
Yeah, bring your own technology, though, really is about standards and
right.
about APIs. That doesn't happen unless, we all have the same, data model like FHIR to map to. And that doesn't happen without standardized APIs. There's a couple of commercial ones even now for feeding research systems that have their own Part 11 compliant APIs to EHRs for research systems. So I think that this is really the key point to make, is everybody should be in their own systems as much as they can be, and not crossing back and forth, because that's where errors happen and where time goes forward. But that really is going to take great APIs and other things. I saw one of the other comments there was standardized definitions for trial entry, and that was on my list of things that I was wishing for, was e-phenotypes for trial eligibility and e-phenotypes for adverse events as screening criteria, that we needed to think at that level of detail when we're in trials, so that we can use the electronic records when we have them to be able to both tell us when patients might be eligible and when they might have had an adverse effect.
So questions from other people on at the meeting? Yeah, Gong?
So what e-phenotypes, in regard to our sequencing project, which ones we're using right now? Right now, our e-phenotype is actually clinics that we're targeting as part of our pilot. So it's not really a phenotype, it's much more an operational definition. But it could be the patients at a clinic with a specific diagnosis, if we wanted to do that as an eligibility criteria for targeting. And we are doing that. So if we wanted to get all of our sickle cell anemia patients or something like that, we could make that a criteria for entrance to our recruitment registry, and then that would drive our things forward. It would suffer the same problems as other e-phenotyping technologies we heard about, would lack some precision there, but that's okay. We can manually review and push people in and out.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Leonard. My name is Guanan, so I'm a researcher from Yale. So I'm doing digital phenotyping. That's why I'm very interested about this concept, phenotyping. So it's, I see, did any like this digital approach by using the existing data framework and by doing this, maybe automate this whole process, or is that just like you said, more operational activities around this?
Well, there's a huge body of literature on electronic phenotyping, and
Yeah.
I can't say that we have implemented all of it. What we're doing is, implementing our workflow and trying to target the patients of most interest. I think most people believe that phenotyping can be done with some precision with ICD-10 codes, that natural language processing is needed in addition to that to get at more precise definitions. And if you really are a maven about this, you're probably going to combine that with machine learning methods to natural language processing codes, machine learning, to be able to develop definitions. And that's what you'll see, similar to what's coming out of eMERGE when people use ePhenotypes there. So all of those, the more complex though, then we wind up with some more needs to read and write things from Epic and standards to make it all work.
Yeah, and I have to say, I saw Matt's comment as well. I don't think there's anybody that does a clinical trial that isn't going to make their own assessment of eligibility, right? So the e-phenotyping is going to get them close, and obviously you want it to be as close and with a reasonable net, but it is very hard for many studies to depend just on the e-phenotyping.
My general example there is something I actually saw in an eligibility criteria: must be willing to take 10 capsules a day for the duration of the trial. There is no patient in clinical practice that has ever been asked that question. You have to actually sit in front of the patient. But there are some things you can use for screening by querying the EHR. There are some things you can use for screening by doing chart review. And there are some things you have to ask in an enrollment visit or a screening visit.
Sure.
Yeah.
If we could at least take the first pass and enable the second pass, that would be great.
That's right. And I mean, I can just tell you the one that we're working on right now, the preventable one, which is about patients over 75 with no CVD to be randomized to statins or not. And the eligibility criteria that they put in, which is a pain in the neck, is never being on statins for more than a year anytime in their lifetime. So, you may find they're currently not on statins, but then you have to obviously talk to them and find out where they were and, what was a statin. And so increasingly, I mean, again, people want to get close.
It is a cultural issue in translating relatively normal scientific thinking into something that can actually be queried based on real data or even assessed on real data. I mean, has chronic disease, failed 2 courses of therapy. Those kind of things are sufficiently vague where a clinician can make that assessment quite easily, but we can't.
Yeah. So Tom, do you want to, I saw you put in something about, you mentioned Vulcan. You want to tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, just mostly as an FYI for folks who aren't aware, that's a work group that's been available for maybe since the beginning of the year that brings together health IT vendors, groups like Advara, life science companies, regulatory agencies, and a couple of folks on this call. And the goal is to increase adoption of current FHIR resources for clinical research and look for opportunities to expand or enhance with new FHIR resources. And one of the things that we've noticed on a lot of the work group calls is that it's a little bit vendor heavy or FDA heavy. And given the audience today, I think it'd really benefit from participation from a lot of the folks on this call. So if your institution is not aware of or participating in Vulcan, I think this would be a great opportunity to get involved with that, in particular with this topic in mind of how can we promote standards to drive clinical research forward.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up. Well, I guess we're at the end of the session. I want to thank Les and James and those that contributed. I really think the clinical research field, not the informatics side, the clinical research, the people that are doing these studies all the time are really looking for some attention and progress on this. And I think if we work with them, and as Tom mentioned, sometimes it's the vendors or the FDA point of view that comes through the, first, and not necessarily the teams that are in the trenches that are trying to, just get that study done in a reasonable time, as they're being increasingly asked why they're not hitting their enrollment goals and how they can, not increase the budget, and how they can bring in more diversity of URMs, patients, and others that don't maybe have access to some of the technology that we're talking to. And people are feeling pretty frustrated right now in the trenches, and would really like some help that would make their job easier. And I do think it's a big issue in the United States, and we're losing research coordinators, we're losing PIs that are trying it once and saying, I don't think this is for me. It's not worth the trouble. So I really do think we need to put some effort here, and I think this was a great start. So thanks again to everybody participating.
I just wanted to let everyone know we do have 3 unconference topics. If you go to the agenda, it's kind of an open forum. If you just want to pop in and out of any room, please feel free, but that's until now to 4:50. So thank you guys.
Thanks.